Let's go to the next question, which is a little spicy, I must say, right? So how can sales teams ensure that they don't become over-reliant on automation and lose critical thinking because AI absorbs more and more responsibilities? This is a great question that I'm actually thinking every day about, right? As I automate a lot of stuff inside AiSDR, like on customer success and sales, I always keep coming back to that. And honestly, I don't have a good answer yet, other than people with critical thinking should be operating AI to their benefit, right? So I think, as usual, there are kind of two categories of workers, right? So creators, right? People who kind of analyze the process, build the process, etc., and then people who execute the processes, right? So I think the biggest risk lies in people who just kind of execute the processes, because that part will be automated more and more. And then there is truly a risk to be kind of become too reliant, but then they can approach it with a curiosity mindset where, hey, let's learn how to use this thing, right? And then let's be mindful of the fact that we should not rely too much on it, because it's a tool to assist and to help us grow faster versus a crutch to kind of make us less sharp, right? And more reliant on it. What's your take, Collin?
So I just took some notes down here because I had a few things come to mind. So this reminds me of a topic that is hot, and it's very relative to AiSDR, where people are talking about the future of education. And they will say things like, you know, now that kids are typing their essays, what's going to happen? They're not learning how to write in cursive, or, you know, we've got spreadsheets and calculators. And so no one's really exercising their mental math or their paper math, you know, part of their brain. And I think there's a couple ways to look at this. On one hand, we can look at it where we start to compare ourselves to the next generation, and we start to think how they're not going to be able to do something that we can do. And, you know, and everyone's been saying things like that since the dawn of time, right? If you go back long enough in history, you will find that there were people who every single day they woke up when the sun came up, and they spent their entire day walking to where they could get fresh water and carrying enormous buckets of water on their head all the way up to wherever their plantation was, or whatever, their community, their tribe. And they would go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then someday someone invented the wheel. And all of a sudden, one person could pull multiple, you know, and then someday they invented running water. And all of these people now, what is their purpose in life, right? And now people don't know how to go fetch fresh water. I don't know how to go fetch fresh water, right? I've never had to do that in my life, but it's also not a problem for me because we just don't have to do it. And so I think we have to kind of think about things like that. Are people going to become dependent on tools and not know how to do certain things that they used to know how to do? Possibly. But will they ever need to know how to do those things without the tool is really the bigger question, because the whole purpose of using tools is so that we can do more, right? And we can move on sort of to the next thing. You know, imagine you're building a house and you had to do it with a hammer and nails, but then someone invented that air gun that shoots the nails like, you know, they're not thinking, well, now I don't know how to hammer a nail. I can't do it as good as the old school carpenter who could hit it in straight and perfect. I also don't need to know how to do it, right? So it really doesn't matter. Now, where I think I'm going to go a little bit off topic here, just because I think that we have to think about AI and robotics from a broader perspective as well, because it's going to impact everything. And on one hand, there are things that humans need to remain knowledgeable on, right? And I would say that at the rawest of form, it's our survival skills, right? We don't want to end up in a world where if we have some sort of, you know, the EMP or, you know, everything goes out, the internet and everything, and people just literally don't know like how to go about their day. I don't think we're at that point, and we're not going to be at that point for a while. That'll probably happen when we have Tesla robots walking around our house, you know, feeding us, cooking for us. And, you know, we'll get to a point where we don't even know how to grocery shop. We don't know how to cook. We don't know how to do anything. That's probably more something to worry about rather than having tools that replace part of your job, right? And so, you know, I'll tie this back into where I started with talking about education, because I think this is a good way to think about it. what everyone's sort of the futurist, technologists and the leaders of the world, the billionaires, so to speak, who are passionate about this subject, Elon Musk being one who's paved the trail a lot here, is they say really what we're doing in the education world. And I bring this up because the future generation, they're the people who are going to really be using these tools. And so, they're already thinking about how we will be changing really the way we raise and educate people, which historically has been very much about memorizing, retaining, and regurgitating information.
Yeah.
And that could not be less useful today than it is, right? It couldn't be more useless than it is now, because we really don't need to retain information. What we need to know how to do is to gather information and to think critically. And I bring that up because that is really the same type of thing that we're talking about here, which is they're saying in education, well, if they're not going to learn and memorize all of this info, like, the American history or whatever we had to memorize to put on our tests, well, then they're not going to know these things. And, the older generations might think that that's going to be a problem, but it's because they don't understand technology and they don't understand that our brain, it's an extension. Now, ChatGPT is an extension of our brain, the same way Google became an extension of our brain. And so what we are, I think, naturally becoming acclimated to is I find myself now no longer even trying to memorize certain things, but I try to recall like what the prompt was maybe of how I gathered that info, so that if I need it again in the future, like I will find myself going back to ChatGPT and just recalling some info as I need it. And I think that that's a large part of what the world's going to look like going into the future, is people are going to be far less concerned with trying to over prepare themselves with info and experience and all this sort of stuff, and much more concerned with teaching themselves and learning how to gather information, how to parse out the truth from the bad, the good from the evil, the right from the wrong, and then how to think critically, which really is that whole piece. And if we can sort of reprogram our education system into teaching kids how to think critically, and then teach them how to use all of these tools, they will be far superior to any prior student who got straight A's, right? And I will tie that back and wrap it up here with saying that I think that ties into the same as what we're seeing with sales, which is that if you have an SDR who was crushing it with a manual process, and then you put them next to the SDR of tomorrow who is crushing it using these tools, they will not be comparable, because the one with the new tools will be able to do so much more. They will be able to accomplish so much more. So again, long-winded answer, but it's because there's just so many sort of overlapping, paradoxes here to sort of cover.
Totally agree with you, but I think that there is a big difference between kind of previous inventions and what's happening today, because it's changing the way we learn. And I think that if you think about human brain as a neural network, it's very difficult to kind of become a critical thinker if you haven't been a good student, right, in some kind of basic things, right? So that's, I think, is the biggest risk. And the thing that comes to my mind immediately is a sci-fi story by Isaac Asimov that I read like many times ago, years ago, where there was basically everyone was learning, right, by having information uploaded to their brain, right? Like you are being, like, the system determines who you're going to be in the future, and then you get all the necessary knowledge uploaded to your brain, and that's it, right? And then there was one guy who was basically unable to kind of go through that process, right? And he was kind of sent to a special institution, right? And he thought that he was defective, right? Something was wrong with him. But then it turned out that those were the people who were actually moving the society forward, because they were learning the old way, and they were always kind of able to kind of learn things independently and go, like, arrive at independent new conclusions and learn new data, not being limited by the essentially memory cutoff, right, of the system that they were uploaded with, right? Similarly, as you won't be able to get data from GPT today that is more recent than like April 23, right? So I think this is also an interesting aspect, and there, like, we can talk for an hour about this topic. So let's jump into a different question. So